Okay, I think we're ready whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Okay. First item is called order. Roll call, please.
Sure. Mr. Barrett, he let me know he was not going to be able to make it today, Mr. Chair. Mr. Burr?
Present.
Mr. Gans?
Present.
Mr. Tom?
Here.
Ms. Chambak?
I am here.
And Mr. Vine?
Here.
So that makes quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Second on the agenda is the review and approval of the legal action report for the December 10th, 2021 meeting, which is the food conspiracy. Has everybody had a chance to review that?
Motion to approve as presented.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay. Item 3, Infill Incentive District IID update.
Mr. Chair, we have with us Dan Bursek from PDSD, who's leading this effort. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so he has a chance to share his and make a presentation for you.
Hi, thank you, committee. I appreciate it. I was actually, well, we'll go ahead and do this. We're presenting kind of alongside the Tucson Norte Sur kind of north-south corridor, and Ian will be here as well to present. So I'll present and then we'll pass it over to him.
Okay.
Let me share my screen real quickly here.
Daniel, let me jump in here real quick. This is Eric Barrett. I'm sorry I jumped in on the wrong call, so I was waiting in the waiting room. So anyway, now part of the meeting.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Eric.
Excellent. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
I can.
All right, excellent. Good deal. So yeah, we wanted, so I'm Dan Bursek. I am a principal planner with Planning and Development Services, City of Tucson. Appreciate everyone having me here to provide a little update for you. So right now we are looking at doing an update to the Infill Incentive District. As you may know, there is a sunset date that was placed on the ordinance back when we last made changes to this in 2019. That sunset date to which the ordinance would revert back to its previous state expires on January 31st, 2023. So about 10 months or so from now. And we wanted to provide a little update to you as we start with the public process related to looking at this ordinance, its regulations, and looking at potential updates and changes. So this is just a little background. I know a lot of you have been involved in this, have developed utilizing it, and obviously are reviewing projects that come through with it. But this is a little background kind of on where we've been over the last 10, 12 years or so. A lot of the current state of what we're looking at right now were changes that were made back in 2015 through a process between 2013 through 15. At that time, the previous ordinance was providing development that wasn't really the best or the intended outcome in certain circumstances. You may know of the district, or I'm trying to think of the other one that's on 9th. What was that? Sorry. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So in 2013, Mayor and Council directed staff to revise portions of the Unified Development Code related to the Infill Incentive District to simplify, incorporate other overlays. So there was already a downtown links urban overlay and a Rio Nuevo district overlay, and to also look at some of those historic issues and issues related to some of the development. So between 13 and 15, there was pretty extensive analysis, deliberation, public review. Many of you may remember this. 100+ public meetings, stakeholder groups. There was an IID citizen task force, which several of you were on. and a planning commission subcommittee to help to kind of develop those recommendations. Eventually, in February 18th, 2015, Mayor and Council adopted the Infill Incentive District Ordinance, and they put a sunset date on it in 2019. We did come back and take a look at this in 2018, 2019. We made a couple minor changes, but didn't make a lot of wholesale changes. There were some recommendations, though, at that time on things that we could potentially take a look at when we come back to it. So it was eventually adopted April 23rd, 2019, with a 4-year sunset date and with direction to take a look at some of those things when we came back. And now we are back. So some of the direction back in 2019 when this was adopted were some of these things. So to look at parking conditions and trends to inform code and policy changes. There have been downtown parking studies. I have a couple of them that will help with this as we start to look at this. Conduct research to better understand areas that have seen less development. Seek opportunities to existing canals to promote transit-oriented development and connectivity to transit. That's part of the reason why we're here with Ian, presenting together with him, and that we're kind of looking at this collaboratively with that new project. Exploring design guidelines to see if there's ways to better address transitions between different areas. And then explore a housing study to determine how to deal with student housing and affordability issues. And there was a pretty extensive housing study that we collaborated with the University of Arizona that will help to inform this. Obviously, in even just the last couple years, since that housing study was completed, things have changed and shifted due to the pandemic, but it will help us inform some of those decisions moving forward. So this is kind of an example of some of the stuff that's occurred since the last time that we looked at this. There was that 2020 market study, housing market study. We made changes to the Central Business District report and the GPLET, so changing the boundaries, requirements for, and that's the government property excise lease tax or lease excise tax. Made changes to the requirements related to that. Recently, we passed a housing and affordability strategy for Tucson. This will help to inform some potential changes as well as we move forward. There has been the Tucson Convention Center master plan and renovation. And then obviously we've made changes related to transportation policy. So there is the equitable transit-oriented development, the north-south corridor. But also Move Tucson was passed, and we are continuing to make other transportation investments in the city. I did want to note just this this equitable transit-oriented development, which is called the Tucson Norte Sur corridor. This overlaps with much of the Infill Incentive District, as you can see on the right here. This is the Infill Incentive District in this kind of magenta color that looks kind of like a coyote, maybe. And then the green portion and the green line runs really right through the heart of it. It's a much larger corridor than just the Infill Incentive District, but it does overlap with this. One thing that's important to note is that the IID is one of the tools that we have in the city or overlays in order to promote transit-oriented development. So we are working to coordinate closely with this effort, this planning effort, which will continue beyond a bit of what of the Infill Incentive District update. But if things come up during that process and feedback that we receive that informs this, it could inform decisions and changes that we do as we move forward. It is also entirely possible that we may make some changes now and then have to come back later once we start to truly implement this new transit corridor line, once we get to that. And Ian will talk a bit about that project here in a second. So some of the policy issues and areas that we are looking at, that we see that we might need to address, and obviously we're planning to hold stakeholder meetings, public meetings, and get input from people on what you feel needs to be looked at. But these are some of the ones that we've kind of identified when we went to Mayor and Council back in February. Looking at potential affordable housing incentives, similar to what we had done on Broadway with the Sunshine Mile overlay. looking at ways that we can provide some sort of regulatory incentive to allow for affordable housing. Looking at downtown and kind of this post-pandemic future and what it means to have potentially less office demand in a downtown area, and how do we account for that, or how do we potentially make changes within the infill incentive district to promote either conversion of that space or use of those spaces. Potential changes to design standards, especially in the downtown links. As we know, the downtown links project will be being completed pretty soon. So looking at seeing how that changes what we have on the ground and what we may need to do. Changes to development and zoning standards. So as we know, there's been quite a bit of development and interest in the downtown area, not so much really as you start going north, a little more to the south, obviously, but especially if you go north of Speedway, that whole section of Speedway to Grant, I don't believe has had any projects. So looking at some of those standards and how do we make adjustments to make it more of an incentive in some of those areas where we haven't seen interest. And then looking and seeing if there's administrative changes to kind of help the process as we go through it. And I'm sure there are going to be plenty of other things that come up in these conversations as we move forward. So this is kind of this was the rough timeline that we had presented to Mayor and Council. We're still working on getting a stakeholder kind of group set up and getting a facilitator, but that should be coming pretty soon. But really, it started off in February 8th with Mayor and Council initiation. We've been developing the materials. We have we got a website up last week, and we went and kind of joined the Tucson Norte Sur workshops that they have to kind of get the word out that we will be starting with this. Instead of March for the first stakeholder meeting, we're actually kind of looking at in April for that first stakeholder meeting. Several of you will be getting invites in the near future related to that as we start to get that set up. Ultimately, the process will have a couple public meetings. We'll have a stakeholder group to guide the process, and then looking at going to Planning Commission and Mayor and Council towards the end of the year to get this done prior to the sunset date expiring. There is always the possibility, if it does take longer, I mean, we understand that these could be potentially larger changes. We could go to Mayor and Council and extend that sunset date a little bit in order to allow for some of this to occur. So really the next steps that we're looking at right now is, we're looking at data analysis and research. We're looking at vacancy rates downtown. We're running land use analysis to see what has been the change over the last 10 years or so, which vacant lots have been converted to development or whatever in the downtown. And doing that in order to inform the stakeholders as we go to them. And then we're beginning the public outreach. So we got a website up this last week. We're developing some IID specific materials. We will establish that stakeholder group in the next upcoming weeks, and then start developing surveys to help really provide information for us as we move forward. So that's kind of where we're at. Just getting started. We're going to have a pretty tight timeline once we really get going, but trying to gather all that information and get ready to kind of move forward with this. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any of them. And then I think Ian will talk a little bit about kind of the coordination between these two as well.
Thank you, Dan.
Could you, Dan, this is Robin. Could you send us, or have Marina send us the website that you mentioned?
Yeah, most definitely. What I can do is I'll get the website and I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
Thank you.
Of course.
One thing I've noticed is there's no link on the TDOT webpage or PDSD. Is there any way to link it to those departments so it's easier to find? I've only been able to find it through the search function.
Yes, we can look into doing that, John. Happy to do so. I think part of it's just the fact that it's been up for 1 week, but you're right. We need to make sure that it's available for people to find.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions for Dan? If not, then next on the agenda is the Tucson Norte Sewer Strategic Plan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. I'm going to pull up my presentation here. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of what I'm going to talk about overlaps with what Dan just described, except, you know, as he mentioned, obviously the IID is very focused around downtown. So I'm going to talk about the Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Strategic Plan. This is really the wonky term, and we've since gone through a rebranding, and we're going to be referring to it from here on as Tucson Norte Sur. Investing in resilient communities and transit. So this is about transit-oriented development, and this is related to a 3-year Federal Transit Administration grant the City of Tucson got in 2019, and that we started just last year. It was a little bit delayed because of the pandemic. So we're basically 1 year into this 3-year grant, and we are just starting the outreach process. And I'm gonna, you know, I know this group is probably pretty familiar with transit-oriented development at this point, but I think it probably can't hurt to define TOD and what we're talking about here specifically. So transit-oriented development includes a mix of commercial, residential, office, and entertainment centered around or located near a transit station. Dense, walkable, mixed-use development near transit attracts people and adds to vibrant, connected communities. So this is the Mercado district. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and which I think is a pretty good example of transit-oriented development in Tucson. There's a pretty good mix. You've got affordable housing, there's senior housing, market rate housing, and a pretty good mix of commercial and restaurant space with this development. So this is not really a new concept in Tucson with the streetcar and some of the development that's occurred along the streetcar route. What is fairly new about this particular project is the focus on equity. And we really mean that in a broad sense. We can kind of define it in one way here, which is that equitable TOD incorporates affordability and accessibility into all aspects of traditional TOD. So all people, regardless of income, race, age, or ability, have access to jobs, basic services, and amenities. So this really focuses on the affordability aspect, which is something that is often criticized about the implementation of transit-oriented development. Obviously, transit-oriented development has a lot of benefits, both for the transit system and for the people who live right next to that transit. But it really could be improved, and I think certainly with the way the housing crisis has gone and continues, over the last few years, affordable housing is really going to be a focus, a key component of this planning effort. So you can see the planned study area on the right there in that map. So what we're talking about here is planning for a future transit line that would connect the Tucson Airport on the south to downtown, up South 6th Avenue through the city of South Tucson, to downtown, and then continue north along either Stone or Oracle to the Tucson Mall and Tohono Tadai Transit Center. So this would connect the three kind of north-south aligned transit centers, Tohono Tadai, Ronstadt, and then Laos Transit Center at Irvington and South 6th, and then connect to the airport. So this is about a 15-mile corridor. So as you can imagine, there's some shared attributes with these neighborhoods, but they're obviously very, very different too. And I'll get into that in a bit and kind of how that's going to impact our planning efforts. But we are dividing this up into 4 different sections. So there's going to be a north segment, which is essentially Speedway North up to Tohono Tadai, a central or downtown segment, which is between Speedway or 1st and 25th, or the boundary with the city of South Tucson on the south. So basically the entire kind of historic street grid there from 1st to 25th or 22nd, and then a little bit south of there. And the city of South Tucson will be its own area because it is its own municipality and they have their own planning processes. And then the south side, which would be essentially from I-19 south to the airport. So a pretty big section of the corridor. And I'm not going to go into all of these different plans, but the purpose of this slide really is just to provide a little bit of context in that the city of Tucson has been working on planning for transit-oriented development for 20 some years, essentially. The Mercado District TOD plan goes all the way back to 2004. And obviously we're still seeing the fruits of that effort. So this is a slow process in some ways, but there's a lot of both transit planning, transit plans and land use plans that have gone into deciding, that this north-south corridor would be a priority for the city. City is also looking, of course, at the Broadway and Sunshine Mile corridor going east-west. And then there's this north-south connection to the airport and connecting a lot of the older neighborhoods in the city. I think it's also probably worth mentioning here, Dan brought up a lot of the coordination that they're working on with IID and kind of how it's coordinated to this plan and a lot of others. And I think that's one kind of central benefit and central part of this effort is that we're coordinating with housing and community development and their affordable housing efforts, so that as much as possible new affordable housing projects are connected to transit. So as the city is looking at locations for affordable or mixed income housing, they are prioritizing areas along this corridor and other major transit corridors. We're working with PDSD and all of their efforts, and we're kind of taking what they've learned from the Sunshine Mile process, and we're going to be applying it here. So there's a lot of kind of interdepartment coordination. There's also the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Project, which is going to be planting a lot of trees and working with the Million Trees effort. And so, aligning that and making sure that we have kind of comfortable connections, shade near bus stops, all of these sorts of things kind of come together with this effort. So big picture goals. I think we're going to seek a lot of input from communities throughout this spring on what really their goals are. So this is kind of getting ahead and kind of the city's goals for this project. But certainly enhancing vibrant, inclusive neighborhoods, incremental development that matches the character of the surrounding area. We know that transit drives investment, right? And so whether this is streetcar or bus rapid transit, we don't know at this point. But we do anticipate that it will drive a fair bit of investment on this corridor. And so we want to make sure that that reflects what the neighborhoods want to see and where it should go. And so that may be a mix of multifamily housing, affordable housing options, maybe more apartment buildings, condos, duplexes, triplexes, a lot of that kind of missing middle housing that we talk about that is definitely missing in the city of Tucson. Job creation that employs local residents, and then finding out from the neighborhoods what kind of amenities they would like to see in terms of public gathering spaces. Should we add more parks? Should we focus on the parks that we have and enhance them? How can we create more quality public spaces that are connected to transit? And then some more specific outcomes. Looking at financial strategies, specific policies around preserving and adding mixed income housing. We have just completed a market assessment, so we know where all the vacant properties are along this corridor and within a half mile of each side of the corridor. So looking at what are areas where the city could potentially purchase land or use existing city-owned land to leverage development or develop itself. Zoning updates to allow for more housing types. Very similar to the kind of incentive program that, we just talked about with the IID, and, zoning overlays and design guidelines, also similar to Sunshine Mile and what the city is going through there. So community engagement is really where we are right now. We actually just had 3 open house meetings this last weekend. We had one downtown at Armory Park, one on the south side at El Pueblo, one on the north side at Limberlost. Those are just the first 3 meetings of many more. We're actually going to have a pop-up for public outreach at Ciclovia this weekend in South Tucson. But we're going to have 3 more rounds of outreach. So this first round that we had this weekend was really just introducing the project, getting very broad feedback. What are the kind of places that people love? What are kind of the priorities for people in these corridors in terms of, okay, do you want to see affordable housing? Do you want to see housing? Do you want to see retail? What kind of things do you want to see? And we're going to dig deeper through the next several rounds of community outreach. We're also going to have focus groups that are oriented around specific topics related to transit-oriented development. So one may be organized around housing and neighborhoods specifically, arts and culture, transportation, public safety. Those are some of the topic ideas. We'll have community dialogues where we really dig in, not around a specific topic, but just have a very open conversation with neighborhoods about this project and get their feedback. And then pop-up events. We'll be going to, where are there existing events that we can kind of piggyback on and have kind of a small pop-up for more input. And we do have a survey actually, and that's on our new website. That's TucsonNorte-shore.com. So the website has all the information about the project, as well as upcoming events. So we do have a survey on there. Please fill out the survey. Please spread the survey. We just put it on there. We'll have print copies at all of our in-person outreach events as well. Timeline for this project, really quickly, we're in phase 1 of this. So we're going to be collecting outreach through the spring, summer, fall, and then we'll be developing recommendations for specific policies to go to City Council and the Mayor's office next year. So we're on a pretty fast timeline. And concurrently with this, the city is going to be applying for funding for likely bus rapid transit for this corridor, so federal funding. And so that kind of plays into this as well in terms of what kind of funding we get and when. But we are starting the planning process now. With that, I will take any questions.
Any questions?
I got thoughts, but I'm not sure I have questions.
Thoughts are great. We're taking all thoughts as well.
My biggest one is, how are we looking to deal with issues of significant low-income housing developments not being in concentrated locations, and which typically happens around this type of activity? So, how are we trying to avoid like the Bronx and other areas that we know are basically just low-income housing, that we promote high-income housing as well within the same transit areas?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that, the focus really should be on mixed income housing, as you say, and getting, a mix of incomes kind of spread throughout the corridor. And yeah, you're right. We don't want to see a focus on just affordable housing in specific areas that potentially, historically creates some issues. So, and we have gotten feedback, City of South Tucson, where this is a project not just with the City of Tucson, but it's also City of South Tucson. And their feedback, from the city government has been, we have a lot of affordable housing right now, and we need, money for basic services because we only have two police officers and a barely functioning fire department. So, it really has to be a mix. You're absolutely right. We need to find ways so that we're not concentrating affordable housing in certain areas. And that doesn't just go for this, for within the corridor, it goes for the city as a whole. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got to meet, this is John Burr. I got to meet with Ian at the meeting the other day. Are you identifying stakeholder groups that you'll consult? For instance, neighborhoods along the line? Are we supposed to reach out? Are we to email you, fill out the survey, so on and so forth? How do you anticipate that process going as you move forward?
Yes, great question. Yeah, good to see you here, John. Yeah, so this week we're actually hiring community ambassadors who are going to work as liaisons between the city and the neighborhoods, and so they'll be, neighborhood advocates, community leaders who are going to help us with the outreach process. But we are going to be reaching out to neighborhoods. So I'll be connecting with every neighborhood association along the corridor, and I've already connected with some, and I'll certainly get to Armory Park soon, so that we can set up times for us to come and present and do, a 10-15-minute presentation for the neighborhood and get feedback and questions basically over the next month or two. So there will be some coordination with that because there are, this is a big study area. But you should hear from us within the next week or so.
Okay. And then the other question that I thought I'd go ahead and put on a formal meeting, how do you anticipate the bottleneck of this transit line connecting through two historic bridges with slopes that don't tend to work with larger transit systems, specifically the 6th Avenue and the Stone Avenue historic bridges?
Yeah, I mean, we are aware that's a potential issue with connecting transit under Stone. There are ways potentially around that, and that's going to have to come later with the engineering. There's always a solution there. Yeah, but that's something that we're going to be considering, absolutely.
And one other thing we mentioned, you saw this as potentially rapid transit bus, but also potentially a new trolley transit line. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so we can't commit to any specific transit type at this point. I think, by far the most likely, given the distance and the cost, is bus rapid transit at this point. The original Federal Transit Administration grant was written with the idea that we would be planning for bus rapid transit. And there's a variety of levels, kind of in the quality, I guess you could say, of bus rapid transit. There is gold level, which, you get a lot of kind of the same, quality of investment, station, and design that you would have with light rail, but it is a bus, and so less expensive. And we don't, have it. This would be a new transit type, of course, in Tucson, but Albuquerque has a great example that they just opened up on Central Avenue. That's gold level bus rapid transit that we're looking at as a case study and kind of we're going to follow and see how successful that is, because there's a lot of similarities in the corridor and demographics and so forth. But, we can't also rule out streetcar. There is, I think, a lot of leadership that really would like to see an extension of the streetcar. And then we've heard a lot from the public that people do want to see an extension of the streetcar. It's been successful. So I'm not sure, whether that'll be kind of connected with this project or not in some way, but that, likely would be in kind of a more limited area. Streetcar, this is a 14.5 mile corridor. So the cost of that would be very high.
Okay. And then you also mentioned that there might be zoning changes coming forward in the next number of months. How do you anticipate those interacting with current underlying zoning, including IID, standard zoning, H, and PZs?
Well, this wouldn't be in the next several months. This would be more like the next couple of years. And that's kind of based on the outreach that and feedback that we get through this process this year. However, yeah, I think, Sunshine Mile and kind of it would be an overlay zoning process, essentially. However, if through the IID, it may just be utilizing what exists as the IID downtown and not adding another layer, if that makes sense. So, maybe a matter of, like Dan said, expanding the IID itself to go kind of up and down this corridor a bit. We don't know. I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves right now. I think that's, kind of the feedback that we want to get from you all and from other groups over the next several months.
Great. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Dan Matlick has his hand raised.
Yeah, I had a question. I remember, having been down here on 4th Avenue for 44 years, the original intermodal concept was to have Suntran, Greyhound, the train and the streetcar all, have a hub. Obviously, we moved Greyhound over to Euclid and Broadway. And so I'm just curious if there's any federal guidelines or your thoughts on what the distances need to be from the demarcation points of the different transit lines for it to be truly effective.
So are you referring to,
so where your rapid transit, does everything have to be point to point or within a certain distance for connecting the different transportation methods?
That's a good question. That's something that I can look into a little bit further in terms of if there are federal standards for that to really kind of create an intermodal hub. I know that is the goal of the Ronstadt Transit Center, is really to have that as that kind of intermodal hub. And they are incorporating, the potential plans for bus rapid transit, so longer articulated buses to come down 6th Avenue there and connect and kind of within the transit center. So yeah, I think there will be a very direct connection between, this line and the existing streetcar and all the bus lines, but I'm not sure exactly at this point how that will function. But yeah, that's a great question, and I'll look into that a bit further.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, members of the DRC, just want to mention that, both Dan Bursuk and Ian Samson can come back and provide updates to the IID DRC as their projects keep moving forward.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda. Go ahead.
And yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Also, I just wanted to acknowledge, I didn't make them part of the roll call, but as you know, Mr. Daniel Madlick is here and Mr. Zan Baker. I invited them at the last seconds when we amended the agenda so they could hear the updates on the IID update and the Tucson Norte Sur.
And I appreciate that. And if my services aren't needed for the rest of your agenda, I'll be dropping off.
Yes, Mr. Madlick. Yeah, Mr. Chair, since Mr. Madlick is part of the 4th Avenue merchants, he won't be able to vote on the Bautista. So.
Okay, next item is item 5, case number IID-21-02 Bautista mixed use. Do you want me to read in the related activity numbers, Maria?
No, that's okay, Mr. Chair. They're part of the agenda.
So the applicant are on to present.
Yeah, and just let me give a quick overview to everybody here, Mr. Chair. So as you know, you've seen the Bautista before in a courtesy review, but they're proposing to build two new buildings over a single-story parking garage, and the buildings will house about 256 units for multifamily residential use. And also they're going to have commercial space at the street level, including a restaurant, and they're providing that connectivity, that pedestrian connectivity to the Santa Cruz River. As part of their application, using the IID as a zoning tool, the applicant is proposing to increase the height that is permitted by the underlying C2 zone from 40 to 60 feet. They're also proposing reduction of motor vehicle and bicycle parking spaces. They submitted their individual parking plan, the IPP, for review. It's currently under review. The comment period will end Monday, March the 28th, next week. Also, they're proposing some modifications to the requirements for landscaping and screening, for refuse collection, and for setbacks. For refuse collection, the Department of Environmental Services has reviewed their proposal, and they have indicated that there's no objection on what they're proposing, but they will be requesting the applicant for more detailed information during the development package review process. And the design professional has reviewed the application a couple of times and is recommending approval. After the presentation by the applicant, we can hear from Mr. Tom about his review. And as you know, the DRC's purview is specified in UDC sections 512.6b4c and 512.6I1. So the DRC reviews the application and recommends, makes a recommendation to the PDSD planning director for his decision. And that's a brief introduction to the project, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Maria. Next on the agenda is item B, project presentation by the applicant.
Gwen, if you're making the presentation, you're muted.
So while Gwen's getting unmuted, I just wanted to make sure everyone could see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, and let me know
Yes.
if you need me to zoom in on anything while Gwen's going through.
Okay, sorry about that. My name is Gwen. I'm here with Tom McQuillan. Appreciate your time. I'd like to give you a brief overview of the project. We're here on behalf of developers, Gadsden Peg Companies. We will, Tom and I will go through and present the overview as well as addressing items A and E on the agenda. And we have with us David Little and Gary Grizzle from WLB, and they'll be addressing items B, C, and D. So in our overview, Tom, if you could go to the next slide. Actually, the next one. So Batista site is located between Cushing and Congress Street. It's a 5.5 acre lot. The project, and it's on a vacant lot right now. The project will provide 256 residential apartments, subgrade apartment parking garage, commercial spaces at street level, and a restaurant. And the next few slides are going to just demonstrate the existing conditions. So slide 1, we're looking south. The next slide, we're going to see a view looking west. The next slide, we're going to look towards the north. Final one towards the east. And this last slide is just an overview of the whole lot, where in the next slide, we can see, the relationship to the bike path and the Santa Cruz River. The next couple of slides are really just images of the project. This first image is the entry into the residential units off of the Paseo. The second image down below is the entrance from Linda Ave into the Paseo between the two buildings. And just a quick view of one of the 4 interior courtyards in the project. And the next image is addressing the connectivity and the shade for the commercial spaces that front Linda Ave. So basically, we have a continuous arcade that provides an inviting edge to the building on Linda Ave. So what we'd like to do, what I'd like to kind of look at here is one of the important aspects of the project was the connectivity and how it relates to the Mercado district. And we're proposing a connection of walkways and paseos that would take you from the Mercado through the Bautista building and provide access directly to the Santa Cruz River. And Gary Grizzle will kind of expand on this a little bit when he addresses some of the landscape components also. And what we did is look to the immediate environment for precedent with two examples. One is the Monnier apartment building, again, looking at scale, size, materiality. And the second adjacent property is the Sentinel Plaza, again, looking at building scale and materiality. So what we have here are rendered images of the top view is what we would see from Linda Ave, looking directly towards the entry into the building. And down below are some repeat little vignettes of images inside the project, ending up on the right-hand side with a view of the arcade again on Linda Ave. And addressing the first item on the agenda for the UDC modification is the height increase. And what these elevations do is provide documentation of the compliance within the 60-foot height range, as well as components of the materiality of the building and the scale and massing over the next 2 to 3 slides. Are just looking at east elevation here. This is the elevation from Santa Cruz River looking out towards Linda. South elevation looking towards the entry into the parking garage. And we've got the west elevation, which is from Linda Ave looking at the building, and north elevation. Again, these also show some of the materials. Well, we've got one more slide that will address the material palette for the building, as well as the signage, which you see here for the commercial spaces and the identifying the actual building. And the next slide being the material palette, again, trying to comply and keep with the identity that's in the Mercado district already. So I think that I would like to hand it over to David Little now so he can address some of the parking and other items on the agenda list.
Sure, thanks, Gwen. So the individual parking plan that we prepared essentially does a couple different things. The total required parking for the project, which is largely driven by the 256 residential units, is 384 spaces. And within the IPP that is under review with the city staff, we reduced the 384 to 377. So it's a very slight reduction based upon typical things that you would do a shared parking study for an individual parking plan for, like bus ridership, streetcar adjacent, that kind of thing allows for up to a 20% reduction. So that's a very small amount. What is not reduced with this IPP is the 1 space per unit that's required for the residential. So out of the 377, I think it says 370 in the package, but the revised number is 377. Out of the 377, 256 spots will be accomplished or provided for on-site in the basement parking garage of the Bautista, and that will provide all of the residential parking, which leads 121 spots to be accommodated elsewhere. What we are proposing is on the screen there, that graphic is there are 2 temporary parking lots, block 1A and block 2 up at the top of the exhibit, that will be improved as temporary parking lots and temporary with a temporary surfacing, but still with landscaping and lighting per city codes. And that's what we've worked out with the city thus far. Those two lots will be utilized to provide those 121 spots, as well as the parking, the street parking that's available on Linda Avenue. So the total out of the 121 provided, 121 required off-site, there's 31 on Linda Avenue, and then the remaining portion of that will be accomplished through those two lots. And it actually ends up needing about a surplus of about 70 spaces, just purely based upon the Batista numbers, by utilizing those two lots. The ultimate plan is, if you'll see in the center of the graphic there, is a large parking garage on block 4 that will take the place of those two temporary lots and provide that and much more parking for the overall area of the whole thing. And obviously will be adjacent and across the street from the Batista project. That's the motor vehicle parking. Bike parking, we're providing, there's 199 long-term bike spots required. We're providing 68 in the garage and additional within the units for the long-term bike parking, the secured storage. For the short term, the only thing that we are asking for through the IID process is we've got 46 short-term loops required, and we're providing 50. The only thing we're asking for is we've got those short-term loops dispersed in places that make sense on the interior plazas and the front streetscape, so that they're not, so they're actually built into the environment that we're trying to create on the plazas and the streetscape, as opposed to just being a sea of bike parking right by the door. And obviously the plaza and streetscape areas become extensions of the interior spaces with how they're used and everything. So yeah, as you'll see on the screen there, it's highlighting some of those bike loops that we're providing on the plan, not asking for a reduction. Actually have a few more than code that's required for code. It's just to space them out and make them fit with the plaza design. That's all I've got. Gwen, do you want to hand it over to, I guess, to Gary on the landscape stuff?
Yeah, great. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, David and Gwen. One of our main goals here was to provide connectivity through the entire Mercado area. This project, Batista, provides one of those connectivity links, as you can see here. You know, and like many of the projects in down the downtown area, we have kind of veered from the traditional landscape and screening requirements. So from Linda Avenue at the top there, we're providing a strong central plaza bisecting the two buildings and leading towards the Santa Cruz River and the existing loop path. Within the plaza, we have shade structures. We've got a shade trellis. We also have built-in seating where there's planters, and we have the seating that's incorporated into those. Obviously, we do have vegetation that's going to provide additional shading. When you're traveling through this courtyard, this plaza, one of the focus points is the fountain down towards the end. We feel like this will be a great area for people to gather, and then it also provides the connectivity to the loop path in the Santa Cruz River. We'll have a pathway that leads down to the loop path. Along the river path, we have multiple connections that will be provided from the loop path up to the Mercado. We've got the bicycle access loop, over on your Sentinel Plaza. Then we have other areas that will lead up from the loop path up to the pedestrian access ways. Additionally, along the river park there, we will have a soft meandering trail that will kind of meander through vegetation. And we've been working with the Pima County Flood Control Department on this design. And one thing obviously we're going to do is we're going to revegetate this area with riparian native plant material. So one of the last things, if you want to go to the next slide, again, you can see this one's angled, turned 90 degrees, so you can see the strong central plaza as it courses through. But one of the things that for the residents, we're providing 4 courtyards, and you'll see them in the interior of the buildings, and these will be for the residents. And it'll be a great place for those for if they want to have social events or simply just relaxing. There's so with that, I got to hand it back to David to go over some more items.
I think the only thing I would add to that, Gary, is Gary, you mentioned that we have had a lot of conversations with Pima County Flood Control District. And they bought up on our concept. One of the things they want us to be very aware of is to keep the overbank flow area open for flood control reasons. So this respects that, and Flood Control District understands that we will have to, together with them, put together an agreement for the various encroachments and maintenance and responsibilities of what we're doing out there in the river park. So we're on board with that. Moving on to item D that's on the screen, part of our application is some alternatives for trash collection. And what we're proposing is interior to the buildings is 4 trash rooms that are totally interior to the buildings. You can see them as the hatched areas, the 4 hatched areas on the plan on the screen. And on trash day, those bins will be rolled out to the street. And that's very similar to the other areas of Mercado, particularly the Monier building. They'll be rolled out there for pickup day. And then, so that's really the 4 on the 4 corners of the building, those interior trash rooms with the path delineated out to the street for pickup day. The addition is on the bottom left of the screen. There's a lot going on there on this graphic there, but there is a separate dumpster area, and that dumpster area is for the future restaurant.
Could you zoom in on that, Tom?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's better. So you can see that the dumpster area there, it's accessed off of the PAL that we provided on the south side of the building with the turnaround area, both for fire and for pickup of trash. So one of the things we have added and going back and forth with Environmental Services and Andy Vera is added in the recycling aspect to the commercial dumpster, and those are those 4 bins shown on the enclosure. They would be rolled out through the man door out to the street area. I think Andy is on board with what we're doing with that change, and what he's asked is that we make sure all of this is shown on the final version of the development package, and in particular just hatching in areas where the bins will be wheeled out to the street in particular, so that they're not blocking sidewalks and that kind of thing. So we will definitely add that to the final version of the development package. But I think that's all I got, Gwen.
Then I think the last item was item E on the agenda, which was the perimeter yard setback from Linda Ave, and 38 feet was what was required, and we're slightly short of it on the northeast corner of the building. So this is just documenting that and requesting that we could get that encroachment modification. And that is it for our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no questions, well, yes.
Mr. Chair, I think the design professional is ready to make his statements.
Okay, Faye.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Yeah, this to me, this is a very fine project, and we didn't have too many issues. We went back and forth a little bit on some things just to get clarity mostly. The height seems to work for me, and even with the encroachment that Glenn just talked about, that looks fine to me as well. I think that for the materials, I think we have some colors and some more explanation of what that is, but we may need a little more detail on it. Like if you could put it on a board or something so that we can actually see what materials that you can use, that would work a little bit better. But that can come later if you need to do it. One question I had was where the handicap parking was that would be going to the restaurant. If you could show that once I get off. And also what happens to the connectivity lane once the parking lot or the parking structure goes in on block 4? Is that connectivity lane goes through that parking area, or so that's just a question. But nevertheless, we gave the approval, and I think this is a great project. Thank you.
Yeah, it's David Little. I can answer those. So on the connectivity, yes, Richard, it would go through. It would go through the design of the parking structure, and there's some very preliminary concepts that Gases came up with for that. But that's a very important aspect that continues all the way from the Norte building over to here through that building, and it's not simply a one big square parking structure. It's got a mixture built the parking garage in it with that connectivity through. So that's that. And then in terms of the ADA parking, the ADA spots for the residential units themselves are in the garage beneath it, next to the appropriate elevator locations. The ADA parking for the restaurant is provided on Linda Avenue out front. So there's, I think, a total of 3 spots for the commercial and retail and restaurant items that need to be accomplished, and that's provided for on Linda Avenue out front.
Okay, thank you.
And we're open for questions. Anyone have questions? Comments?
This is Bill. I have a question. Could you indicate on the site plan where the commercial activity will be located? And my second thing is where is the bicycle parking in relation to the loop?
I can address the first question. So the commercial activity is primarily along Linda Avenue, behind a pedestrian arcade. So all on the upper portion of the site, these are all commercial spaces. There are going to be a live work component to the Paseo side. So a lot of these units have been dedicated to live work units, which are accessible directly from the Paseo.
And this is David on the bike parking. You know, the majority are within that Central Plaza area where it's highlighted, and then all along the perimeter of the building, there's actually some additional that are not highlighted on that drawing on the screen on the streets on the north and south side. But really, what the design intent of this whole plaza area was to provide the short-term loops within the Central Plaza area in terms of the serious cyclist along the loop is to provide them a direct connection up to Paseo de los Senjeros, the road on the north. So it's got a strong connection up to the street and provides access on Senjeros over to the Monier and the existing Mercado areas through there. But, yeah, the bike parking loops are pretty well dispersed throughout the site.
How large is the restaurant space?
It's just over 10. Let me just double check what my numbers are here. Bum, bum, bum.
5,800.
It's about 5,800 square feet. 5,800. Thanks, Tom.
That's the restaurant that I just circled with the bubbles.
Right.
And this is the retail up here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
How many bedrooms in the complex?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
How many bedrooms in the 256 units total?
I don't have that at the top of my head right now. I can get it to you though.
Okay.
Yeah, Gwen, we had it on
Mr.
the-
Chair,
Sorry,
I'm
had
sorry,
that
Mr.
on-
Chair, I was just gonna mention that Mr. Bear has his hand up.
Oh, Mr. Bear.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First, the ADA access down to the river path, that is going to be like a concrete or pavement type surface, not stabilized DG?
Correct. The path that's ADA accessible will be a hard surface, not
Okay.
not DG, not stabilized DG.
Okay, great. Second, are we maximizing the number of trees we can get along the outer perimeter? I count 18, but would like to see about 3 times that many. I'm sure there's a lot of issues, but I mean,
The graphic on here, Eric, is not showing all the trees, especially on the south side. There's trees along the south side that screen that. They show up in the elevation views from the architect, but somehow they didn't make it onto this graphic. So there are more trees than what's shown around the building.
okay. And then I'm sure you've dealt with our current staff and some things. How are you addressing kind of water harvesting? And I don't care if it's water harvesting from rainwater or if it's condensate collection. How are you looking to address that? Because I think it's something that we really need to start taking a really close look at how we're trying to address those issues.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. We're addressing the water harvesting in the River Park area. We're going to be providing in the overbank from the loop path up to our site. We're going to be providing water harvesting in that section.
Okay. Are you gonna be able to get into that, some of the pavement areas to drain to the trees that are along Linda or some of the other streets, into your streets?
Certainly, yes, some of the areas that are like in the Central Plaza, some of that can drain. And then some of the small areas, not too much of the streets will drain into that.
Okay.
And in answer to your number of bedrooms, I believe we've got 389 beds.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know how to put my hand down, so.
Very good.
I just have
Mr.
one other.
Chair,
quick
Mr.
one. Are there
Mr.
any,
Burke has
are you
a
providing
question.
electric charge station?
Can you repeat that?
This is Bill. I was just wondering, are you providing electric car charge stations either in the garage or in the development?
In the garage we are, in the parking garage.
Curious, how many stations are you providing?
I don't have that on the top of my head right now, but I can get it to you, okay?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Burr has his hand up too.
Hey, John?
Yeah, I want to thank the team for addressing the concerns we had during the courtesy review. Tom mentioned that there may be some need for an elaboration of details on the project. Is that something, when we make the motion, that the design professional can make recommendations on those sort of things if we generally approve the project? And I don't know if that's Maria or...
Mr. Chair, Mr. Burr, members of the DRC, the DRC has the ability to, recommend approval under certain conditions. If the DRC wishes, the conditions include for the design professional to review items X, Y, and Z. They can go ahead and rely that responsibility on the design professional. The design professional, as the project gets modified further on, has also the ability to determine if this would need to go back to the DRC for further review.
Okay, so we should probably limit ourselves to just major changes to the exterior elements.
That's something that Mr. Berman, Mr. Chair, members of the DRC, that's something that DRC can explore as the motion is established.
Okay.
And then I may ask the design professional to kick in as needed.
Yeah, what I was looking for was just a little more clarity on the materials and the textures. I think we've talked about signage. If the along Linda Avenue, if there was going to be a sign that says Batista, or and where that was going to be located. So if we can get some clarifications on that, as they go along, that would be good.
Actually, we can have a quick look at it now. What I did include, based on your previous comments, was general location for the building signage, as well as each of the commercial spaces would have a sign over the entranceway, as well as a decorative light fixture, and a sign that would be attached to the building itself, so that pedestrians, walking parallel to the building could see the signage.
Okay, thank you.
And then one other question I had about the parking. I'm glad that it is 1-to-1 per unit, although the number of bedrooms suggests that there may be further requirements in the area, depending. The parking spaces that are allocated to temporary spaces now, but will be further developed in a proposed garage or series of garages that the design team has suggested will maintain that connectivity in the future. Will those 160 spaces that are in the current IPP be transferred as an obligation for that other property in the future when it's developed, or will they not transfer? My question stems from a non-tracking of IPPs. So spaces, in my experience, spaces are now being allocated for 4 or 5 projects or more along certain street faces in various development zones around the downtown area. And so once everything is all built at once, I'm not so sure that parking requirements will be met.
Mr. Burr, Mr. Chair, we have with us Mark Castro from PDSD. He's leading the IPP review effort. Mark, can you please kick in?
Yes, thank you, Maria. This is Mark Castro, Mr. Chair, Mr. Burr, and members of the DRC. So what we can do with the IPP, and I understand Mr. Burr's comments, and that's a good point. We can do a condition with the IPP that ties the development to a more permanent parking facility. And actually, in conversation with the Park Tucson administrator, we would recommend a condition that one of the temporary parking lots become more of a permanent parking lot. In other words, it gets a DP approval. And that way we do have that, we do have that parking spaces that are allocated as a permanent parking facility. And then should the project move forward with the development of the parking garage, those parking spaces go away and it transfers over to the new parking garage. So that's kind of where we're going with the IPP and our recommendation that I've been coordinating with Park Tucson.
So the condition you're requesting that we add is that the parking, off-site parking be conditioned upon inclusion and for future review of structured parking in the area?
Mr. Burr, Mr. Chair, members of the DRC, we would actually, or that condition would actually go with the IPP. It wouldn't be with this meeting.
I understand that, and I understand it's a separate review, but it's a request that we're being asked to consider. So I just wondered how we should do that so that the proper processes move forward after it's out of our hands.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Burr, members of the DRC, that and Maria, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you can recommend that condition. I just didn't want to create any redundant conditions, but that's completely fine.
Okay. All right.
That is correct, Mr. Burr, Mr. Chair, members of the DRC. The IID DRC can make that recommendation to the PDST director as well as part of your, your motion.
Okay. And then I assume that the parking for the residences will be separate lease from the actual lease of the units. Couple people are shaking their heads yes, so I assume that's to be the case. Are you also planning on implementing requirements for residents to, for instance, not make noise from balconies within a limited period of time and so on and so forth, because you have senior housing to the north and there's going to be other housing in the area in the future. What sort of policies do you anticipate including in your final development package?
David? Is that something that you wanted David to answer?
I'm not sure who exactly on the team I'm addressing it. It's just, are you planning on noise abatement issues that are what you are planning for tenancy agreements with future residents so that we don't have the same sort of problems with balconies on a large scale multifamily housing that we've seen, for instance, in some student towers elsewhere in the community?
I'm not sure. We've addressed that. Have you, do you have any input on that, David?
I don't know if Adam or Matt, if they're on the phone, if they want to chime in on that. Just speaking on my own, I would think that we wouldn't have the problems that are typically seen of student housing on this kind of development, just given the clientele. But I don't think there's anything specific written into the rental agreement.
David, this is Adam. There actually are specific provisions in the lease agreements, and this will be handled at the property management level.
Okay. I just wanted to know that you were considering it in case there are problems, because it's going to be a major housing community in a larger ongoing rebuilding of that whole area. I think that's it for me. Otherwise, I'm fine with the plans as presented.
Hear the question. Motion.
Mr. Chair, were you asking for a motion?
I am asking for a motion.
I can make the motion that we approve the project as presented with two conditions. One is related that the design professional has the opportunity to review the materiality of the project as previously noted, and that the condition described as related to the IBP be included. And I need a little help with the language of that, but those were the two conditions that I heard.
I think that's just that the temporary parking lots, the off-site parking will be tied to future parking development structures.
Thank you, John.
And should we also add if there are any further major changes, it should come back for review?
I'd accept that as a third condition, correct?
Okay, I'll second.
Okay, we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Mr. Chair, I need to hear six votes. So I'm gonna make a roll call since I'm having trouble hearing the ayes. Mr. Barrett?
Aye.
Mr. Burr?
Aye.
Mr. Gans?
Aye.
Mr. Tom?
Okay.
Fed?
I'm sorry.
Ms. Schambach?
Aye.
And Mr. Viner?
Aye.
We have a vote of 6 for 2-0. The motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda, all the audience. No one? Okay. Future agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the DRC, the future agenda item will be the Corvette block. They're coming back with modifications to the design package that was previously approved. They're adding a series of pickleball courts to the site. So we're in process of accepting their application and be reviewed by the design professional, the PRS, and then it will come to you. That's the one project I have for you in the future.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other business, I move for adjournment.
Second.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Be well.